Hey there folks, Tim Slade here, and welcome back to the ATD Ask a Trainer video series. In today's episode, I am answering some really important questions about diversity, equity, and inclusion in training. So let's get to it. Over the last several years, more and more organizations have been making really great efforts to ensuring that diversity, equity, and inclusion is a top priority in their day-to-day operations. And what I mean by this is that organizations are looking to go above and beyond simply providing, let's say, an annual compliance course on diversity, equity, inclusion, and they're instead looking at really the very fabric of their culture, their operations, their practices, and even their training to ensure that employees are engaged, represented, and most importantly, supported to do their best work. And from a training perspective, our industry is evolving just as quickly, whether it's to ensure diversity from a racial, ethnicity, or cultural standpoint, or from an accessibility standpoint, the need to consider diversity, equity, inclusion in what we do every day as learning professionals is becoming greater and greater. And, well, rightfully so. So, with that said, let's get to your questions about diversity, equity, and inclusion in training. All right, so our first question comes from Kath Ellis. Hi, Kath. And Kath asks, where can I find diverse stock images and graphics for my learning projects? I love this question, Kath, because, there was a time when it was really, really hard to find good stock images that didn't look really generic and weren't full of just white Caucasian people. I mean, there was a time where that's all you could find. There was people wearing oversized suits with their 90s haircuts, doing weird things like shaking hands in these white amorphous workspaces, and they were all Caucasian. It was really, really hard to find modern photography that looked like real people doing real things in real work environments and represented the diversity of today's population, right? And so nowadays, here's the good news. Nowadays, there's just an exploding market of websites that offer images that are not only modern and look like real people doing real things in real work environments, but they're also free. They have the Creative Commons Zero license, which means you can download them and use them in your projects without having to provide or give attribution, which is fantastic because we know how expensive stock photography can be. So my three favorite stock photo websites would be Pexels.com, Unsplash.com, and Pixabay.com, and I'll put the links to those in the description. Those websites have libraries of millions of stock photos of all sorts of different types that you can use in your projects, and I highly encourage you to check those out. As for stock graphics and illustrations, this is another exploding market where there's just tons of these websites where they're offering free illustrations that are customizable that you can use in your projects, and they have a lot of diversity within them. The two that I've used are undraw.co and drawkit.io, and again, I'll put those links in the description below, but those websites, you can create some custom illustrations, download them, they can be as diverse as you need them to be, and you can use those in your projects for free. So the options are nearly endless and they're growing by the day. So I encourage you to check those out. Thank you so much for asking, Kath. Okay, so our next question comes from Karen Muse. I hope I said that right. Karen says, how can we make sure learners who struggle with executive function, information intake, and overload can still benefit just as much as any other learner? What a fantastic question, Karen. And I think what you're talking about is neurodiversity. People who might be on the autism spectrum, maybe they have ADHD, OCD, some sort of, neurological condition, right? That might hinder their ability to take in information and learn, right? As we think about the world of accessibility, so frequently we think of motor skill impairments or auditory impairments or vision impairments that might prevent learning. And so, in the field of e-learning, we work to make our courses more accessible for those audiences. But to your point and to your question, we also have to think about neurodiversity. How do we make sure our content is optimized for folks who might be struggling with some sort of neurological condition, like you mentioned? And so, I'm not the expert in any of that, but here's what I would say. And this is kind of my stance overall on accessibility. I don't subscribe to the idea of one size fits all solutions, right? I think too often people in our industry think about, if I'm going to create an e-learning course, for example, I need to figure out how do I make that e-learning course accessible to every possible person, to any possible condition they might have. Maybe they can't see or hear or have a motor skill impairment or something else. I'm not a big fan of one size fits all learning solutions. And let me give you an example. I always like to use stairs and ramps as analogies for this. So, most of us use stairs to get from one floor to another in a building. But we know that there's some folks who can't use stairs. Does that mean we get rid of the stairs? No, we keep the stairs because stairs work for a lot of people. But maybe we add a ramp. Or maybe we add an escalator, or maybe we add an elevator. We create solutions that are fit for function given who might be using the stairs, the ramp, the elevator, etc., etc. And which one we choose to use depends on a variety of factors, right? It's expensive to do an escalator or an elevator, and so if it's only a gradual incline, maybe a ramp is sufficient. Unless you're going up to like the 50th floor of a building, of course you're going to do an elevator. You make it fit for function. And so whatever you choose to do, however you choose to create learning that's accessible for folks who might have folks, for neurodiversity, you want to do what's going to work for them. And maybe that means creating a separate deliverable. Maybe if they don't feel comfortable going to an ILT, you provide a video or an e-learning course. Or maybe if the e-learning course isn't going to work, you provide something that they can read or whatever the case might be. I think accessibility is not about creating one-size-fits-all solutions. It's about creating a diversity of solutions so that hopefully one of those will meet most of the folks' needs. So I hope that helps, Karen. Thank you for asking. All right, so our next question comes from Katie Van Horn. Hi, Katie. I used to work with Katie at GoDaddy, by the way. I don't know if anyone knows that. Katie asks, how can we use personas to create better learning content while also avoiding bias? Ooh, I love this question, Katie. Here's the thing. For those of you who aren't familiar with what Katie's referring to with personas, personas is a practice, or creating a persona is a practice that came really out of the marketing world. And in marketing, oftentimes when they're trying to create marketing content targeted towards a specific audience, they might create a persona or a series of personas that represent their target audience. And when you look at a persona, you're looking at, what's their age, what are the things they struggle with, what are their goals, what are their desires, and you create sort of a generic picture of who your audience is so you can figure out how to best target that audience, right? And the same thing has been recently adopted in the world of learning and development, usually as it relates to design thinking or learning experience design. You might create or go through a process of creating a persona of your target learners, doing the same thing, figuring out who they are, what are their desires, what are their goals, what are the things they struggle with in their jobs, and figure out how do you create training that is geared towards that audience based off that persona. But here's the problem with personas. When you create a persona, it's very easy for that persona to get littered with your own biases, right? And you want to avoid that. And so when creating a persona, you don't want to create a persona in a vacuum. You don't want to just do it yourself and keep it to yourself. You want to go bounce it off other people. Go bounce it off your audience. Go bounce it off people who work with your audience. Go observe your audience. It's okay to create personas, but what you don't want to do is create them in a vacuum because your biases might accidentally get into that persona. And the thing is, and one of the things I learned from you, Katie, actually, is that we all have biases. No matter what, we're all, walking contradictions full of biases. So I think personas are a good thing. What you want to avoid is creating a persona in a vacuum and thus potentially letting your biases infiltrate that persona. So I hope that answers that question, Katie. Thank you for submitting. All right, so our fourth and final question comes from Alex Moore. Hi, Alex. And Alex asks, how do you ensure diversity, equity, and inclusion when you're training globally and there are mores around deferring to elders or there are restrictions around interacting based on gender roles? Oh, I love this question, Alex. And this one is a challenging one because I think too often in our industry, we, as learning professionals, take on the burden of determining what the cultural norms are or what's culturally accepted within our organization as a whole or within our company as a whole. And I don't think we should be putting that on ourselves. Instead, what I think you should be doing is partnering with whomever in your organization, the person or people who are there to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion, or manages diversity, equity, and inclusion, partner with them and figure out how you as a company are going to address that. There are going to be times, especially with global companies, that you're going to have divisions that work in different parts of the world that have different cultural norms. And it is your company's responsibility to figure out, do they support it? Do they not support it? How do they work around those boundaries? And then our job is to embed those philosophies, whatever those are, into our training. It's not our job to determine them. I hope that makes sense. So I would encourage you to partner with somebody else in your organization, whether it's in HR or whoever manages culture and diversity and equity and inclusion, and partner with them on making the right decision. Don't go at it by yourself. I hope that helps, Alex. All right, I think that's all we have time for today, and those were such important questions about such a really important topic, and I know we didn't even scratch the surface with all the things we could have possibly talked about in today's episode. So as always, I want to thank everybody who submitted a question for this month's episode, and of course, if you're watching this on YouTube and you want to get alerted the next time we publish an Ask a Trainer episode, you can click that subscribe button below, and of course, check out the ATD Ask a Trainer advice column by clicking on the link in the description. My name is Tim Slade, and I'll see you around.